The sun over the desert world of Saren was like a giant fire hanging low in the sky. Its heat pressed down on everything, turning the air heavy and dry. The land around the trade station was endless sand, stretching so far that the horizon shimmered. In waves, only the tallest rock spires broke the view. They looked like the bones of some ancient giant, standing silent in the wind. The station itself was not large. It was made of pale stone and rusted metal, built close to the ground so the wind would not tear it apart. The walls were thick to keep out the sandstorms, and the roofs were covered with old cloth to give shade. From above, it looked like a handful of small boxes clustered together, the only sign of life for many days' walk every day. Traders came from far-off villages in wandering caravans. They brought jars of dried roots, sacks of grain, small mechanical parts, and strange crystals from the desert caves. In return, they bought fuel, cloth, tools, and most important of all, water. On Saren, water was more precious than gold. The world had few springs, and the people guarded them with strict rules. The station's well was the largest in this part of the desert. It was said to be deep enough to reach the oldest waters hidden under the ground. Mira walked slowly toward the station gate, holding a small clay jug. She kept her head down, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. Her legs felt weak. It had been 2 days since she had last drunk more than a mouthful. The heat made her eyes ache, and her lips were cracked. But she had no choice. She needed water, not for herself alone, but for the small, sick animal she carried in a cloth sling under her arm. It was a desert runner, a creature with long ears and soft fur, rescued from a sand trap the day before. Without water, it would not survive. At the gate, two guards leaned on their spears. They wore cloth wrapped around their heads and faces, leaving only their eyes visible. One glanced at Mira and gave a short laugh, nudging the other. Mira heard the word impure whispered between them. She ignored it and walked past. The word had followed her since she was a child. She did not fully understand why, only that her mother had come from another clan and her father had broken some old custom. That alone made her different, and different here was dangerous. The main courtyard was busy. Stalls lined the walls, each covered with cloth to keep the sun away. The air smelled of dust, dried herbs, and hot metal. A group of traders haggled loudly over a sack of grain. A boy ran past carrying a bundle of copper wire. The sound of a water pump clanking came from the far side of the yard. Mira made her way to the water counter. Behind it sat the station's keeper, an older man with skin darkened from the sun and deep lines on his face. He wore a long white robe and a chain with a copper seal. Around his neck a sign of his authority. The counter was stacked with clean jars and cups, and behind it a large metal tank gleamed in the shade. She placed her coin on the counter and set her jug down. A half fill, she said quietly, her voice rough from thirst. The keeper looked at her, then at the coin. He did not touch it. Instead, he slid it back toward her with one finger. "Not for you," he said. His voice was flat, without anger, but also without mercy. Mira's throat tightened. "I have payment," she said. "It is fair. You know the rule," the keeper replied. "The well water is not given to those of mixed clan blood. Take your coin and go." For a long moment, she did not move. Around her, the noise of the courtyard went on as if nothing had happened. People avoided looking directly at her, but she could feel their awareness. A few slowed their steps, listening. No one spoke up for her. Her lips parted as if to argue. But then she closed them again. Words would change nothing. She picked up the coin and the jug, turned, and walked away. Each step felt heavier than the last. The heat seemed to press closer, as if the air itself was trying to push her down. She found a narrow strip of shade along the station wall and sat there. The desert runner stirred weakly in the sling, its breathing shallow. She stroked its head, gently, her heart aching. She had saved it from the sand, but she could not save it from thirst. She thought of the long road back to her small home at the edge of the cliffs. The journey would be slow, and without water, dangerous. Mira closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather strength. She told herself she would try again at sunset. when the heat was less and perhaps a kinder hand was at the counter. But in her heart, she knew the answer would be the same. Rules here were like stone hard and cold, unchanged for generations. A shadow passed over her. She opened her eyes to see a figure walking through the courtyard. Unlike the others, he was tall, wearing a simple shirt and trousers, with a broad belt and a pack slung over one shoulder. His skin was lighter than the locals, and his hair was short. At his side hung a strange-looking tool in a leather holder. Mira recognized him at once as a human, one of the few who had begun visiting Saren in recent years. Most came to trade for crystals or spices. They were seen as odd, but not yet bound by the station's customs. The man stopped at a stall nearby, speaking briefly with the merchant. His voice was deep but gentle, and his words carried the accent of off-world travelers. As he turned away, his eyes swept across the courtyard and landed on Mira. For a brief moment, their gazes met. She looked down quickly, embarrassed, but she could feel his eyes on her a moment longer before he walked on. She did not know it yet, but this was the moment her life would begin to change. The afternoon sun was still high when Mira decided to try once more. She waited in the narrow shade of the station wall until the crowd thinned a little. The voices in the courtyard had grown softer as some traders left for the day, their carts creaking across the sand toward distant villages. The wind carried the smell of hot dust, making her throat feel even drier. The desert runner in her sling gave a weak sound. Its small tongue flicked out, searching for moisture that wasn't there. Mira stroked its fur gently. Just a little longer, she whispered. Her own lips were cracked, but she would give her first sip to the small creature if she could. She gathered her courage and stepped back into the open. Her feet felt heavy on the sun-baked ground. The long cloth covering her shoulders stuck to her skin. The well stood at the far end of the courtyard, behind the counter where the keeper still sat. Mira tried to keep her steps steady as she approached. She placed the jug on the counter again and held the coin between her fingers. "Please," she said quietly. The keeper did not even reach for the jug. His gaze was firm, his voice unchanged. "Not for you." Her heart sank. She knew the words. "We're coming," but hearing them again still hurt. "It is not for me," she tried, her voice breaking slightly. "It is for this." She gently shifted the cloth sling so the keeper could see the desert runner. Its eyes were half closed, its breathing shallow. The keeper's expression did not soften. "The rule does not change," he said. "No water for the impure." Mira felt the weight of every eye in the courtyard. She could sense people slowing to watch. Some looked away quickly when she glanced at them. Others stared with quiet interest. None spoke for her. She wanted to argue, to tell him the rule was cruel and foolish. But she had learned long ago that words against the customs of Saren were like throwing stones into the wine. They would only blow back at her. With slow movements, she picked up the jug and coin. Her hands trembled, but not from weakness alone. As she turned to leave, a sound broke the silence, a steady step crossing the courtyard. Mira looked up and saw the human from earlier. He was coming straight toward the water counter, his pack swinging slightly with his stride. He stopped beside her, glanced at the jug in her hand, then looked at the keeper. "How much for a refill?" he asked. His voice was calm, carrying the accent of someone from far away. The keeper's eyes flicked between the two of them. "For you, traveler, the price is 1 coin," he said. The human reached into his belt pouch and placed a coin on the counter, but instead of setting his own container down, he nodded toward Mira's jug. "Fill hers," he said. A ripple of murmurs moved through the watching crowd. Mira froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The keeper's eyes narrowed. "You wish to buy water for her?" "That's right," the human replied simply. The keeper leaned back slightly. "You do not understand our law. She is not allowed water from the well." The human's brow furrowed, but his tone stayed even. "She is thirsty, the small creature. With her is dying. You have water. I have payment. This is fair trade. It is not our way." The keeper said, shaking his head. "The well is for the pure only." The human studied him for a moment, then gave a short sigh. Without a word, he reached to his belt and unhooked a metal flask. He twisted the cap and held it out toward Mira. Mira stared at it, her breath catching. She could see drops of water clinging to the inside. For a moment she hesitated, taking it in front of the crowd felt dangerous. But the thirst in her throat and the sight of the struggling dessert runner left her no choice. Her fingers brushed his as she took the flask. The metal was cool from the shade of his belt. She lifted it to her lips and drank carefully, only enough to wet her mouth. Then she cupped her hand, poured a little into her palm, and held it to the runner's mouth. The small creature lapped it up weakly, its eyes blinking open. Round them, whispers spread. Some sounded disapproving, others curious. No one had seen such a thing before, an outsider breaking the custom so openly. The human waited patiently until she handed the flask back. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice rough but clear. He gave a small nod, then turned to the keeper once more. "You see," he said quietly, "the world does not end when you help someone." The keeper's face was unreadable. He said nothing as the human walked away. Mira stood still for a few moments, unsure what to do. The flask's taste still lingered on her lips. She could feel the eyes on her as she made her way back to the shade. The dessert runner settled more comfortably in its sling, breathing a little stronger. For the rest of the afternoon, Mira stayed in her corner, watching the human move through the station. He spoke with merchants, traded goods, and carried himself with quiet confidence. He did not look back at her, yet she knew he had noticed her again in passing. When the sun finally dipped toward the horizon, the heat eased slightly. Traders began to gather their goods for the night. Mira rose, ready to leave. As she walked past the stalls, she heard fragments of conversation. People were talking about what had happened, about the human, about the flask, about the rule. Some voices held anger, others only wonder. By the time she reached the gate, the guards were no longer laughing. They only watched her in silence as she passed into the cooling dessert air. The long walk home still waited, but she carried a little more hope than before. She did not know his name, and she did not know if she would see him again. But the simple act of kindness had left something in her heart, a spark that the dessert sun could not burn away. The evening came slowly to Saren. The sun dipped lower, turning the sand from gold to deep red. The wind changed, carrying cooler air from the far cliffs. The trade station quieted as merchants packed their goods and travelers found places to rest. Ren, the human trader, stood near the outer wall, watching the dessert. His ship was parked on a flat stretch of rock beyond the gates, but he preferred to walk among the station's people before settling for the night. His eyes studied the faces that passed him, curious, some distant. He was used to that. On many worlds, humans were still newcomers, strange and unpredictable in the eyes of others. He carried no guard with him, only his heavy pack and a small tool at his belt. Inside the pack were trade goods, woven cloth from his homeworld, small machines that could fix broken pumps, and packets of seeds that grew in poor soil. But trade was not the only reason he visited stations like this. Rim believed that learning a place's customs, speaking to its people, and sharing simple kindness often opened doors more than coins could. Earlier that day, he had noticed the young woman in the shade. Her face was tired, her eyes cautious, and she carried something in a cloth sling. He had seen her at the water counter, refused with a coldness that felt sharper than the dessert heat. He did not understand the reason, but he knew what thirst looked like. Now, as night came, made his way toward the small inn inside the station walls. The inn was a long, low building made of sun-baked brick. Its roof was covered with stretched cloth to trap the cool night air. Lamps hung by the door, their yellow light flickering gently. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cooked grain and herbs. A few travelers sat at low tables, eating their evening meals. The innkeeper, a short man with a thick scarf around his neck, greeted Rin with a polite nod. "Room for the night?" he asked. "Yes," Rin said, placing a coin on the counter. "And a meal, if you have one." The innkeeper took the coin and pointed to a table near the wall. "Food will come shortly. Water is included." Rin sat down, his back to the wall so he could watch the room. He noticed conversations quieting when he entered. Some glanced at him, then looked away. Others whispered softly, their eyes darting toward the door as if expecting someone else to come in. After a few moments, he heard a voice from a nearby table. Two older merchants were speaking in low tones. They say he gave her his own water. One murmured, yes, the other replied, right there in the open, before the keeper himself. A dangerous thing. The clans will not like it. Or maybe they will remember it, the second said, his tone uncertain. Ren kept his eyes on his table, but his ears stayed open. It was clear the small act had stirred talk. Whether that talk was good or bad, he could not yet tell. His meal, rye flat bread, a bowl of warm grain, and a small cup of water. He ate slowly, listening to the gentle hum of the inn. Outside, the air was growing cooler, and the wind carried the faint sound of distant drums from one of the larger homes in the station. When he finished eating, he stepped outside. The courtyard was quiet now, with only a few figures moving under the lamps. Most stalls were closed, their cloth covers tied down against the night wind. The well stood silent in the far corner, its pump locked for the night, across the courtyard. He saw the young woman Mira walking toward the gate. She held her clay jug now, but it was still light in her hand. The dessert runner peeked out from the sling, its ears twitching slightly. She glanced round the courtyard, perhaps checking if anyone followed her, then stepped outside the gate into the open desert. Ren followed at a distance, not to intrude, but to make sure she reached wherever she was going safely. The desert at night could be dangerous, not just from the cold but from creatures that hunted in the dark. The sky above was vast, filled with more stars than could be counted. The moons hung low, casting pale light over the sand. The sound of Mira's steps was soft against the ground. She moved with the quiet skill of someone who had walked these paths all her life. After a while, she stopped near a cluster of rocks. There, in the shadow, she knelt and pulled something from the sling. The dessert runner stretched its legs, stepping slowly on the cool sand. Mira poured a small amount of water from a gourd. She carried water she must have gotten from somewhere, other than the well-and let the creature drink. Ren stood back, watching. There was a patience in her movements, a care that reminded him of farmers on his homeworld tending to young plants. She said something softly to the animal, words he could not hear. When she was done, she looked up. Her eyes caught the faint shape of him in the moonlight. She hesitated, then spoke across the short distance. You followed me. Ren stepped forward enough for her to see his face clearly. Only to be sure you reached here safely. This is my home, she said quietly. No one waits for me inside the station. He nodded. Still, the dessert can be dangerous at night. Mira studied him for a moment. Her expression was not unkind, but it carried the guardedness of someone who had learned to expect trouble. You are not from here, she said. No, Ren replied. I travel from world to world. I trade goods. And sometimes I just listen. Listen to what? Stories. He said simply. Every place has them. Some are told aloud. Some are written in the way people treat each other. Mira's gaze lowered briefly, as if she understood his meaning. She gave a small nod. Then you already know my story? I know a little, Ren said, but not enough. Why do they call you impure? Her voice was steady, though the words were heavy. My father was from another clan. My mother broke the old law to be with him. When they were gone, the law stayed. The word stayed too. Ren was silent for a moment. He had seen many kinds of division on many worlds, but it was always the same in one way, built from rules that forgot kindness. You cannot change their law alone, he said, but sometimes one act can make people see the law differently. Mira gave a faint smile, though her eyes were sad. Your act today will be forgotten tomorrow. Maybe. Ren said, or maybe it will be remembered longer than you think. They stood in the quiet for a few moments, the desert wind carrying the scent of dry stone. Then Mira called the runner back into the sling and turned toward the rocks. You should rest, traveler. The desert is long, and so is the road to change, Ren replied softly. She gave a small nod, then disappeared into the shadow of her home. Ren stayed outside a while longer, looking at the stars. In his mind, the story here was just beginning. Morning returned to Saren with the same harsh light as always. The sun climbed quickly, washing the desert in bright gold. Heat began to rise from the ground before most people had finished their first meal. The trade station woke slowly, doors opening, cloth shades pulled back, voices of merchants calling to passing travelers. Ren left the small room he had rented at the inn and stepped into the courtyard. His pack was on his back again, heavier now with new goods he had traded for. The air was already warm, and the smell of heated stone filled his lungs. Across the yard, he saw the water counter. The keeper sat in the same place as the day before, his copper seal glinting in the sunlight. A short line had formed, each person placing coins on the counter and walking away with full jugs. Mira was there too. She stood at the end of the line, her clay jug tucked under one arm. The dessert runner peeked out from the sling at her side. Its ears twitched weakly, its body still thin. Rin could see the way her shoulders were tense, as if she already expected what would happen. When her turn came, she placed her coin down and set her jug on the counter. The keeper's eyes moved from the coin to her face. His hand did not reach. "For the pump, not for you," he said. His voice carried across the courtyard. Mira stayed still for a moment. Then she took the coin back without a word. She turned to leave. Her steps slow, her gaze on the ground. Rin's path shifted toward her. He walked to meet her before she reached the shade. Without speaking, he reached to his belt and unhooked his metal flask. It was large enough to hold more than a single drink, and inside, the water was still cool from the night. He held it out to her. She stopped, her eyes moving from the flask to his face. "You should not," she said softly. "Why not?" Rin replied. "It is my water." Her gaze flicked toward the keeper, who was watching from behind the counter. Several people nearby had turned to look as well, their voices lowered to whispers. "If you give it to me here," she said, "you are breaking their rule." "I know," Rin answered. "But rules should not stop someone from drinking." For a long moment, Mira stood frozen. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the flask. Her fingers were trembling, though whether from thirst or from the weight of the moment, she could not tell. She unscrewed the cap and took a small sip, just enough to wet her mouth. Then she poured a little into her hand and held it to the dessert runner's mouth. The creature drank eagerly, its small body trembling with the effort. Mira smiled faintly at the sight, her shoulders relaxing just a little. The whispers around them grew louder. A few faces in the crowd showed open disapproval, but others simply watched in silence. The keeper's expression was hard, but he made no move to stop them. When Mira was done, she held the flask out to Rin, but instead of taking it back, he nodded toward her jug. "Fill it," he said. Her eyes widened. "Here, now." "Yes," Rin said, "if they will not sell to you, I will give you mine." She hesitated, then slowly opened the jug. Rin poured until it was half full, the water glinting in the sunlight. When he finished, he capped the flask and clipped it back to his belt. The sound of the water pouring seemed louder than the usual noise of the courtyard. When Rin stepped back, the keeper spoke at last. "Traveler, you have done what is not allowed here." Rin turned to face him. "I have done what is right," he said. "If a person is thirsty, they should drink. That should be the first law. Anywhere." Some of the watching crowd shifted uneasily. A few nodded slightly, almost without meaning to. Others shook their heads. The keeper's gaze was cold, but he did not order Rin to leave. Perhaps he knew that forcing the issue in front of so many eyes could make the challenge to his rule even louder. Mira clutched her jug close, as if afraid someone might take it from her. She glanced at Rin, her expression a mixture of gratitude and fear. "You should go," she whispered. "I will," Rin said quietly, "but not before they see this." He stepped away from her and began walking toward the market stalls, moving slowly so the act could not be ignored. The people he passed gave him looks of surprise, curiosity, and on some faces approval. Mira followed a short distance behind. She kept her head low, but her ears caught fragments of new whispers. "Did you see?" He poured from his own flask and in front of the keeper. "Maybe the law is not so strong after all." When Ren reached the far side of the courtyard, he stopped to look at a merchant's stall. Mira kept walking until she was back in the narrow shade along the wall. There, she set the jug down and let the dessert runner drink again. Its small body leaned against the cool clay, eyes closing in contentment. From where she sat, she could see Ren speaking with merchants, trading goods as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet she knew what he had done would not fade quickly in a place where everyone knew the rules. Breaking one so openly was like throwing a stone into still water. The ripples would spread. As the day went on, she noticed changes, small but real. A young boy from a nearby stall brought her a small piece of flat bread without being asked. An older woman, passing with a basket, paused to nod at her instead of turning away. Not everyone's gaze was friendly, but for the first time in many years, not all were hostile. By the time the sun began to sink, Mira's jug was lighter, but not empty. She had given some to the dessert runner and saved the rest for the night. When she rose to leave, she saw Ren standing near the gate, speaking with another traveler. He caught her eye and gave a small nod, nothing more. She walked past him without a word, but the nod stayed with her in the quiet space of her mind. She understood something, even in a place ruled by stone-hard customs. One simple act could loosen the first crack, and sometimes that was enough to begin a change. The next morning, the station felt different. The wind carried the same dry heat, and the sun rose just as fiercely, yet the air in the courtyard seemed charged. People moved in small groups, speaking in low voices, and more than once Mira noticed glances being cast her way. She sat on the low step outside the old storage room. The dessert runner curled beside her in the shade. Its fur had smoothed, its eyes were clearer now, and it breathed without the shallow gasps of the past days. She let her hand rest gently on its back, drawing quiet comfort from its warmth. From the far side of the courtyard came the sound of boots against stone. Ren was crossing toward the water counter again, his tall frame cutting a clear path through the market. He moved without hurry, yet his steps were steady, as if he had something in mind. The station keeper was already there, speaking to a merchant. When he saw Ren approach, his expression darkened slightly. "Back again, traveler?" he asked, his voice carrying to those nearby. "I am," Ren said. "I still have business here?" The keeper's eyes narrowed. "And will you break our law again?" Ren did not look away. "I will give water to anyone who needs it, if that breaks your law." "Then yes." A ripple of whispers moved through the watching crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably, but others leaned closer, their attention caught. The keeper stood straighter. "Our rules are older than you. They keep order. Without them, there's only chaos." Ren's voice remained calm. "Order without kindness is only another kind of chaos. A thirst that is left unanswered does not respect your rules, it only grows." The keeper's jaw tightened. "You speak like you know this world. But you are not of us. You do not understand our ways." "I understand enough," Ren said. "I understand that life here is hard, that water is precious. But I also understand this: if you can spare some for one who is dying of thirst, and you choose not to, then your law is not strength. It is fear." Mira felt her pulse quicken as she listened. The words were bold too bold for most locals to speak aloud. The crowd was silent now, every eye on the two men. The keeper's gaze swept across the courtyard, as if checking how many were watching. "You would undo the balance we have kept for generations," he said. "Maybe it is time to test that." "Balance," Ren replied. "A balance that cannot survive a single act of kindness is not worth keeping." For a long moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy, as though the heat had doubled. Then an older merchant stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. His beard was streaked with gray, his hands rough from years of work. "I remember a time," he said slowly, "when my own caravan was lost in the dunes. A stranger gave me water. Though I had no coin, if not for that, I would not be here today." "Was that chaos, keeper?" The keeper's eyes narrowed. "You know this is not the same." "It is," the merchant said. "Thirst does not ask where you are from or who your parents were." A murmur of agreement rose from a few in the crowd. Others still looked uneasy, but the silence was broken. Ren glanced at Mira. She sat frozen, unsure whether to move or stay hidden. The dessert runner stirred at her side, its ears twitching. The keeper's voice grew sharper. If we give to all who ask, our well will run dry. Do you wish to see this station abandoned? Rin shook his head. I am not asking you to give. To all who ask, I am asking you to look at the one in front of you and decide if letting them suffer makes you stronger or smaller. The crowd was watching not just the keeper now, but each other. Faces showed small shifts, furrowed brows, thoughtful frowns, the beginnings of doubt. Finally, the keeper turned away, his voice clipped. I will not change the law for a stranger's words. Rin's tone did not harden. Then the law will change without you, because people are already thinking about what they saw yesterday. With that, he stepped back from the counter and walked toward the market stalls, leaving the keeper standing alone. The whispers began again, more voices. This time, carrying further across the courtyard. Mira let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She rose from the step and moved toward the shade of a nearby awning, wanting to avoid the center of attention, but still keep her in sight. As the day went on, she noticed small signs of change. A woman from one of the food stalls offered her a cup of cool tea when she passed. Two boys playing near the gate stopped to let the dessert runner sniff their hands, instead of chasing it away. Not everyone was kind. There were still cold stares, but the wall around her felt thinner, less unbreakable. That evening, as the sun painted the dunes in shades of orange and purple, Mira found Rin at the edge of the courtyard. He was leaning against the low wall, looking out toward the horizon. You made him angry, she said quietly. Rin smiled faintly. Anger means the words reached him. If they meant nothing, he would have stayed calm. But he will not change, Mira said. Not soon. Change often begins before anyone notices. Rin replied, it starts in thought, in doubt. In the small moments when someone asks themselves if the way things are is the way they should be. She looked at the dessert stretching beyond the wall. Here, change is slow, like the sand shifting after many winds. Then we wait for the winds, Rin said simply. For a moment they stood in silence, watching the light fade. Then Mira asked, why did you do it? You could have walked past me, kept your water, avoided trouble. Rin's answer was quiet, because where I come from, someone once did the same for me. Mira thought of the flask, the sound of water filling her jug, the eyes of the crowd watching. She nodded once. Then maybe I will do the same for someone else one day. Rin smiled deepened just slightly. That's how change travels, from one person to the next. The wind shifted, carrying the cool breath of night, and though the station still held its old rules, something in its air felt just a little different, like the first stirrings of a new season. The sun was setting over the dessert station. The air was still hot, but a soft wind began to rise. Mira walked slowly along the narrow path between the market stalls. She carried her small jug, not because she expected it to be filled, but because it was the only thing she owned that gave her hope. That day, something felt different. People were still watching her, but their eyes did not carry the same sharpness as before. She wondered if it was because of what happened the day before, when the human Rin had given her water in front of everyone. It was a simple act, but it had been bold. In this place, rules were like stone, and no one dared to touch them, yet Rin had done so without hesitation. Mira still felt the cool taste of that water in her mouth whenever she thought about it. It was the first kindness she had received from a stranger in many seasons. She did not know why he had helped her. Maybe it was because humans did not believe in her people's customs. Maybe it was simply because he saw she was thirsty. As she walked, she noticed an older merchant standing by his stall. His fur was white with age, and his hands were rough from many years of work. He called out to her softly. Mira stopped, unsure if it was safe to answer. No one called her unless they wanted to send her away. The old merchant looked around as if checking for watchers, then reached under his counter. He pulled out a small pouch made of animal skin. When he opened it, Mira saw the faint shine of water inside. Without a word, he handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she took it. Why? She asked quietly. The old merchant smiled faintly. Not everyone agrees with the rules. He said, some of us remember when kindness was worth more than tradition. Mira wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. She drank carefully, knowing that every drop mattered. When she handed the pouch back, the merchant shook his head. Keep it. You may need it more than I do. She walked away with the pouch tucked close to her chest. It felt like the first crack in a wall that had been unbroken her whole life. One act of kindness from the human had somehow loosened the chains of silence. The next day, Mira went to the small garden on the edge of the station. It was owned by a farmer who grew hardy plants that could survive the desert. The farmer, a quiet man with deep-set eyes, was bending over a row of seedlings. Mira stood at a distance, watching him work. When he noticed her, she prepared herself to leave, thinking he would tell her to go. Instead, he nodded at her. It was a small gesture, but it was not the usual cold dismissal. For the first time in a long while, someone had acknowledged her presence without judgment. Later, while walking through the main street, Mira overheard two traders speaking. They were not whispering insults as usual. Instead, they were talking about the human's words from the day before. Thirst doesn't care about rules, one of them repeated, as if testing the meaning. That night, Mira sat outside her small home, watching the stars. The station was quieter than usual. She thought about the changes she had seen in just a single day. They were small, almost invisible, but they were real. A look, a nod, a pouch of water, these things had never happened to her before. She also thought about Ren. Since that moment at the well, she had not spoken to him again. He went about his business like any trader, never looking for praise or attention. She wondered if he even knew what he had started. The wind grew cooler, carrying the scent of sand and distant rain. Mira closed her eyes and listened. For the first time in many cycles, she felt something warm inside her, not from water or food, but from hope. She did not know how far this change would go, but she knew one thing. The wall around her was no longer solid stone. Somewhere, there was a crack, and through it, light could pass. The following morning, as the sun rose, Mira set out with her jug again. She still did not expect the water keeper to serve her, but she walked with her head a little higher. She knew that one small act of kindness could travel farther than anyone imagined, and perhaps, in time, more cracks would appear until the wall itself was gone. If you want, I can now write part 7 with the final emotional closure where Mira's life truly changes because of the human's act. That part would carry the final ripple effect of kindness. The day began like any other. The heat of the twin suns pressed down on the desert station, and the air shimmered over the stone paths. Mira walked through the market with her empty jug, the same jug she had carried for years. But this time, she felt different inside. The memory of the last few days stayed with her, the old merchant's gift, the farmer's nod, the whispers of traders repeating the human's words. She reached the well in the center of the square. The water keeper stood there as always, tall and stern, with the iron cup at his side. He saw her and, as expected, narrowed his eyes. You know the rules, he said. Mira nodded. She had no intention of arguing. She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, another voice spoke. She will drink today. It was Ren, the human. He stood just behind her, a hand resting on the strap of his water flask. His tone was calm, but it carried a weight that made the water keeper pause. The keeper frowned. You have no authority here, human. Our customs are not yours. Ren stepped forward. Customs that let someone die of thirst are not worth defending. A small crowd had begun to gather. Some watched with interest, others with unease. Mira felt her heart beating faster. She had been in the center of attention before, but it had always been for shame, never for defense. From the back of the crowd, the old merchant stepped forward. The human is right, he said. She has done no harm. Why should she be refused water? The water keeper looked unsettled. It is the way it has always been, he replied. Another voice joined, and it was the quiet farmer. Tradition is not a reason to watch someone suffer. Murmurs spread through the crowd. For the first time, more than one person was speaking. For her, it felt like a storm building in the air. Ren turned to the crowd. Who here has never needed help? Who here has never been given kindness? No one answered. The silence was not agreement with the waterkeeper, it was hesitation. A space where doubt could grow. The old merchant stepped closer to the well. If she cannot drink, then I will not drink either. The farmer added, nor will I. Others in the crowd began to nod. A trader, a young worker, even a guard. One by one, voices rose, all saying the same thing. The waterkeeper's hands tightened around the iron cup. He looked at the crowd, then at Mira. His face was hard, but his eyes showed uncertainty. Finally, he filled the cup with water and held it out to her. Mira stood frozen for a moment. It had been so long since she was allowed to take water from the well that her mind struggled to believe it was real. Ren gave her a small nod, as if telling her it was safe. She stepped forward, took the cup, and drank. The water was cool and clean. It washed the dryness from her mouth and throat, but it also washed something deeper, the heavy weight of being unseen. When she handed the cup back, the crowd was still watching. The waterkeeper said nothing. From that day, the rule began to change. It was not quick, and there were still those who whispered behind her back. But the silence that had once surrounded her was broken. She could walk to the well and fill her jug without being chased away. People began to greet her not with warmth at first, but with something new, recognition. Ren did not stay at the station for long. His work as a trader took him to many worlds. Before he left, he found Mira at the market. You changed things here, she said quietly. He shook his head. No, you did. I only reminded them of what they already knew. She looked at him for a moment, then asked, why did you help me that day? He smiled slightly. Because Thirst doesn't care about rules, and neither should we. When he left, Mira felt a strange mix of sadness and gratitude. The human was gone, but the echo of his actions remained. The old merchant still sold his goods. The farmer still tended his plants, and the well still gave water to all who came. The wall that had stood her whole life was no longer unbroken. Sometimes, at night, she would sit outside and watch the stars. She wondered if Ren looked at the same stars from another world, and she hoped that somewhere, someone else was finding kindness because of him. Her jug was never empty now, but more importantly, neither was her spirit.